Let's talk a little bit about Nietzsche. Nietzsche on vegetarianism. This won't be, all of his thoughts on diet and vegetarianism, but it's in Ecce Homo. He's always fun to read. Nietzsche is not a boring philosopher to read. He's always fun. There is not a single thing here that is boring. Not a single thing. In both Genealogy of Morals and Ecce Homo, there is nothing boring here. Ecce Homo is even more entertaining to read, actually, his autobiography. But my favorites are Twilight of the Idols and Antichrist and his later works, and Zarathustra, of course. Now, of course, I like all of them. I like The Gay Science, I like Beyond Good and Evil as well, but I really like his last ones because, that's the freshest, that's his latest himself, He's talking about nutrition here. Of course, he's talking about religion, of course. I'm much more interested in a question on which the salvation of humanity depends far more than on any theologian's curio, the question of nutrition. For ordinary use, one may formulate it thus. How do you, among all people, have to eat to attain your maximum of strength, of virtu, in the Renaissance style, of moraline free virtue? You see, he actually sees, the body as very important as well. It's not just abstract. Actually, he doesn't like the abstract, so that's why he goes counter to just, he always talks about spirit, but the way he speaks of spirit is, a human, a whole, all the emotion, thoughts, everything. They actually the same way I'm seeing it. I'm basically explaining my interpretation, but I like using this as well. I used it before I even read Nietzsche, but it's still interesting to see that we're very similar in that sense. But it's pretty funny also how nutrition and diet, all of this is important, not just to health. He's also talking about health, actually. If you go to Ecce Homo, when he speaks about Zarathustra, he talks about the great health. So you see, it's all about health in the end. But here, you see, he combines body, nutrition, and philosophy. It is important for philosophy. It is important. How do you eat to attain maximum of strength? You see, virtu, the manly, strength, forwardness. How do you have this focused? How do you, just move forward like a warrior, like a naive warrior? What kind of food do you need? So not just in thought, but physically. What do I have to eat? So that is, that's part of my philosophy as well, and that has been part of my philosophy actually before I read this. So this is not heavily influenced on me. It's just that it is something that I agree heavily with Nietzsche. So as a little bit of background there, Nietzsche ate a lot of meat and then he ate a lot of fruit. So it's basically the same way I'm eating. I'm eating a bunch of meat or eggs actually as well, or fish as well, which is protein. So a lot of protein, and then you have hydration with the fruits and so forth. And I do OMAD. He didn't eat all day long. He actually talks about not snacking as well. I will get to here. I will get to that soon here. My experiences in this matter are as bad as possible. I am amazed how late I heard this question, how late I learned reason from these experiences. Only the complete worthlessness of our German education, its idealism, explains to me to some extent why at precisely this point I was backward to the point of holiness. This education, which teaches one from the start to ignore realities, you see he's against this idealism. So you see, and the education doesn't teach people, how to eat properly, and actually in modern day, it's the same thing. It's still the same symptoms here. We never get taught how to eat properly for strength, for vigor, for virtu, or whatever you want to call it. The same with money, the same with wealth. You never get taught how to make money. You never get taught about any of the important stuff that you need in your life. And that's the whole purpose of my philosophy. It's the whole purpose of my work, to create this void, to create an education, a course, multiple ways of learning, also on YouTube, multiple ways of learning how to eat properly, for strength, for resilience, for inspiration, for all of this. You see, he goes against here the German education here, but it's the same in Sweden, in modern day Sweden, it's the same in modern day Germany, America, everywhere. In the West, it's still the same everywhere in the world. It's the same thing. You see, this education, which teaches one from the start to ignore realities and to pursue so-called ideal goals, a classical education, for example, as if it were not hopeless from the start to unite classical and German into a single concept. You see, he goes against anything that's German. He dislikes a lot of German, everything basically, culture. He goes against Protestantism, Christianity, obviously, and it's funny, his dad was a Protestant priest, but he wasn't, he died when Nietzsche was very young. So, but he revered his father and mother and sister, except in the end there with his sister. But more, it is amusing. Only imagine a classical educated man with a Leipzig dialect. You see, he's never boring to read. Nietzsche is never boring to read. He's so funny. He has more on this, on Germans, in Ecce Homo. Perhaps I'll get to that another day. Indeed, till I reached a very mature age, I always ate badly. You see, morally speaking, impersonally, selflessly, altruistically, for the benefit of cooks and other fellow Christians. By means of Leipzig cuisine, for example, I very earnestly denied my will to life at the time when I first read Schopenhauer, 1865. To upset one's stomach for the sake of inadequate nutrition, this problem seemed to me be solved incredibly well by the aforementioned cuisine. It's said that 1866 brought about a change in this respect. But German cuisine, quite generally, what doesn't have it on its conscience? Soup before the meal, and in Venetian cookbooks of the 16th century, this is still called alla tedesca. Overcooked meats, vegetables cooked with fat and flour, the degeneration of pastries and puddings into paperweights. Add to this the virtually bestial prandial drinking habits of the ancient, and by no means only the ancient Germans, and you will understand the origin of the German spirit from distressed intestines. You see, the German spirit is an indigestion. It does not finish with anything. You see, but he's not only railing against the Germans. You'll see here the English diet as well. You see, he talks about, vegetables overcooked, meats as well. It shouldn't be too overcooked. Meat shouldn't be too overcooked, as you can see here. Fat and flour on vegetables. You see, he goes against that as well. And of course, pastries and puddings, of course he's against that. He's also, of course, against alcohol. He was drinking. He said he drank when he was younger, but his health was always bad. Nietzsche's health was bad always, ever since he was a kid. But he understood that alcohol kills. And today we know that it kills liver cells. So I'm also against alcohol. You can't, alcohol doesn't solve anything. You only postpone all your problems. And, it's against life because you numb all the, faculties in your head instead of rising, instead of rising life, instead of the rising life. So you see, alcohol goes against, it pushes down thoughts and emotions and everything, which goes against your nature. So you see, you suppress humanity. We should never suppress humanity. We should never deny our humanity and our nature. And you see, indigestion. I've talked about indigestion in my previous videos. in the recent ones as well. And you see, this is a broader concept as well. So, but you see, it is literally about, nutrition and food, but it also mentions, it's also very deeply tied to a spirit, a mentality. You see, the German spirit, it does not finish with anything. You see, it doesn't finish with it doesn't work with it properly. It's cold, so to speak, or, rationalist. He's not against coldness, but in a different way. The icy cold mountains, for example. But he's talking about, in thought, in philosophy as well, in artistry, in art, digesting stuff, not just reading. When we have other stuff he's said about this, when he speaks of, indigestion when it comes to literature, when people just want to read faster, all these, surface level things that I speak of as well, which is an even bigger problem today than in his time. But he already analyzed this in his own time. So, and imagine if he was here today, he would have been, amazed how surface level everything is. You see, it's indigested. You never think deeper about these philosophical concepts or ideas and so forth. So, and that's just thoughts, and you have emotions as well, feelings, the whole human spirit. He also says here, but English diet too, which is compared to the German and even to the French, a kind of a return to nature, meaning to cannibalism, is profoundly at odds with my instincts. It seems to me that it gives the spirit heavy feet, the feet of English women. So heavy English women. As always, he's funny here, but also, it is true. It is a heavier meal, and it's still like that. And when you think of English diet, the traditional, it is like that. That is pretty amazing. And also, the cannibalism there. I'm thinking a little bit of Christianity here. Cannibalism, the wine and the bread and all that. So you see, he is against bread. He is against that stuff. Afterwards, he says, the best cuisine is that of Piedmont. It says here in the notes about Piedmont, the northwesternmost province of Italy, which borders on France and Switzerland. Its biggest city is in Turin, where Nietzsche lived for 2 months in the spring of 1888 and again in September 21st, 1888, until his collapse in January 1889. As most people know, he collapsed in Turin there. But you see, here he ate. I know that in these hotels, he didn't cook his own food. In these hotels, they made his steak and then a lot of fruit, and that was his diet. That is what he thought was the best diet. So you see, he wasn't for, this vegetarianism. He was for meat. We will get to this soon here. Alcohol is bad for me. A single glass of wine or beer in one day is quite sufficient to turn my life into a veil of misery. The people of Munich are my antipodes. Assuming that I did not comprehend this until rather late, I really experienced it from childhood. As a boy, I believed that drinking wine was, like smoking, to begin with, merely a vanity of young men, and later on a bad habit. Perhaps this harsh judgment should be blamed in part on the wine of Naumburg. To believe that wine exhilarates, I should have to be a Christian, believing what is for me an absurdity. Strangely enough, in spite of this extreme vulnerability to small, strongly diluted doses of alcohol, I almost became a sailor when it is a matter of strong doses. You see, he can't, digest. That's why he speaks of indigestion. He can't properly digest alcohol. Now, no one can, we're not made, we didn't evolve to digest alcohol. Alcohol occurs naturally sometimes in, fruits, but virtually all animals avoid these foods, or fruits when they become alcohol, except humans. Even as a boy, my fortitude appeared at that point, writing a long Latin essay in a single night, and copying it over to, with the ambition in my pen to emulate my model, Sallust, which is a poet, in severity and compactness to pour some grog over heaviest caliber over my Latin, even when I was a student at the venerable Schulforta, where he was, one of the most famous and best schools in Germany, best reputation. That did not in any way disagree with my physiology, not perhaps with that of Sallust. However, I disagreed with the venerable Schulforta. Anyway, so here he will talk more about, so Richard Wagner, which he loved in the beginning, but then later he distanced himself from Richard Wagner and everything that has to do with him, even his music, his, anti-Semitism. Now, Nietzsche, as far as I know, wasn't ever an anti-Semite. He actually went deeply against and always emphasized being against anti-Semites. He even speaks of, the genius of the Jewish, thought and philosophy of creating the slave. Even when he's against the slave morality and slave philosophy, but he also recognizes the genius of it, the creation genius of it. The same with Christianity and Jesus. He recognized the genius of Jesus, and that Jesus was the only Christian that existed. All Christians after have just corrupted and destroyed his philosophy. That is Nietzsche's thoughts. If you read Antichrist, I think it's Antichrist or Twilight of the Idols, he speaks of that there. So you can get it there. I read those very closely together, so I sometimes mix them up. To me, when I read Nietzsche, I get his, I can almost, hear him. There is a rhythm to his work. I love that. I just love that. There is a, great art. I mean, he's the best artist and philosopher. He's the best artist philosopher. That's basically what I love as well, artistry and philosophy. In all my poems, I always include the meaning of life. Everything comes from the meaning of life, from my, inner spirit and, the philosophy. So philosophy and art for me is both. And it's the same with Nietzsche. He combines everything. And you see even health and nutrition and digestion, all of this, it's part of philosophy. The same for me. It's all part of philosophy. And you see here, later around the middle of life, to be sure, I decided more and more strictly against all spirits. He means here alcohol. I, an opponent of vegetarianism from experience. You see, from experience. He's tried this. It's not just when he also says this in some earlier writings here. He says, I only speak in philosophy. I only speak in experience and of experience and things he has experience of. He doesn't speak of stuff that he hasn't any experience of. So you see experience, but also, he read a lot, of course, but he also experienced all these feelings and emotions and heights and depths and so forth. So when he speaks of that in Zarathustra, for example, that is all truth, for example, it's all his truth. So you see here, I, an opponent of vegetarianism from experience, just like Richard Wagner, who converted me, cannot advise all more spiritual natures earnestly enough to abstain entirely from alcohol. Water is sufficient. Now you see, again with alcohol, water is sufficient here. I prefer towns in which opportunities abound for dipping from running wells, Nizza, Turin, Sils. A small glass accompanies me like a dog. In vino veritas. It seems that here too I am at odds with all the world about the concept of truth. In my case, the spirit moves over water. There are some, allusion to Genesis 1:2 here with moves over water, and then in vino veritas means in wine there is truth. You see, he is against all this. A few more hints from my morality. You see, he's basically hinting here, his morality, but together with this, with health, with nutrition. A hearty meal is easier to digest than one that is too small. You see, he ate a lot, but also I know from his habits that he ate during one, he had basically one or later snack in the evening, but he had one true big meal. So you see, he ate a big steak, and then he ate a lot of fruit, perhaps a couple of kilos, I don't know, but at least 1 kilo of fruit for sure. And I'm doing the same thing. And I know today that this is the way, because you live in the extremities. You see counterbalances. I eat a lot of meat, and then I counter it with a lot of, not water, fruit. I drink a little bit of water as well, but only that which I need. So I fast almost all day. So most of the day is fasting. And then in a short burst, you have energy, nutrition, almost like a gamma ray, short burst. Obviously, it's not a short burst, but from the view of the universe, it is a short burst. So it depends on your perspective. But you see here, it's a hearty meal. You need a big meal to that is digestion. A small meal does nothing. You see, you shouldn't eat multiple small meals per day. Eat one big meal per day. That the stomach as a whole becomes active in the first presupposition of a good digestion. One has to know the size of one's stomach. You see, I also feel this when I've done all these experiments with OMAD and all these things. I've also, learned more and more about my stomach, what expands it almost. I can almost feel it expanding when I'm eating. And I know when, even the time now, takes me like 40 minutes. It takes me basically half an hour to eat a lot. And, basically the same way animals eat. For example, lions eat like that. Snakes eat like this. They fast a lot, and then they eat when they get hungry, and they're laser focused, everything. One has to know the size of one's stomach. For the same reason, one should be warned against those long drawn out meals which are called interrupted sacrificial feasts, those at the table d'hôte. You see, again, he's against anything that's Christian, he's against. You see, it's a short burst of eating. It's not a feast, long feast. It's not interrupting sacrificial feasts. It's not a long drawn out meal. It is short, it's a burst, it's fast, but it's also a lot. So you see, the same way inspiration happens. So you see, basically life, we sculpt and emulate life, the body, the same way we get mindful inspiration of ideas and books and our, work. And it's the same thing, so the mind part of the body. So you see, it is amazing how connected we are. You see, even here, you see, no meals between meals. You see, no snacking. He understood this in the 19th century. Imagine that he understood nutrition much better than most people today. Not multiple meals. No meals between meals. You see, OMAD, basically OMAD. Nietzsche was for OMAD. He ate 1 meal per day. I think he ate a little bit, in the evening, perhaps sometimes, I believe he did that, but not always. And I actually don't disagree with that, because if you have troubles with sleeping, which he had, by the way, but he had headaches and, he threw up a lot, I think. And he woke up very early as well. And, but before, I think, he woke up before the sunrise. But actually, that's what hunter-gatherers do as well. And I did it today as well, and I do it all the time as well. So, another thing, I agree with Nietzsche with nutrition. I actually didn't know this. I was against this before I read this, by the way. So it's not like I'm just taking from Nietzsche here. No meals between meals, but it's we have the same or similar experience and observation of other people. I've seen in my mother problems with coffee. I've seen it with every single person, in my life. My father, everyone. They all have, this, and also my own experience with tea. So you see here, he also says no coffee. Coffee spreads darkness. Tea is wholesome only in the morning. Oh, you see, it's not in the evening. He talks about tea in the morning, but that's the only moment you drink tea. I'm actually against that as well. So I'm against Nietzsche here. We don't need tea. You only need tea when as medicine. I only see tea and coffee as medicine. And that's, it's plants. There are oxalates there. When you drink tea, you drink oxalates. You drink all this anti-nutrition. It takes from the body. We know this today. We know this. So you use that only, as a medicine thing. Perhaps not even that, because we have fasting. You only dry fast, and that's your best medicine for everything. You see, coffee spreads darkness. It is so true. It is so true. A little but strong, tea is very unwholesome and sicklies one over the whole day if it is too weak by a single degree. You see, it's very delicate there. Everybody has its own measure, often between the narrowest and most delicate limits. In a climate that is very agaçant, provocative, tea is not advisable for a beginning. One should begin an hour earlier with a cup of thick, oil-less cocoa. You see, he's more for cocoa here. But I'm actually against that as well, because we don't need this. We don't need this. This is totally unnecessary. But obviously, I agree that cocoa is much better, raw cocoa powder. It is much better than both tea and coffee. But this is the best. Now, this is not nutrition, but this is still the best. Sit as little as possible. Give no credence to any thought that was not born outdoors while one moved about freely, in which the muscles are not celebrating a feast too. All prejudice come from the intestines. The sedentary life, as I've said once before, is the real sin against the Holy Spirit. You see, that's where I got that from. And so that is what Nietzsche thinks about nutrition, activity. You should always be active. He always walked a lot across these mountains in Switzerland and all these mountains in Italy and so forth. So you see, you should be active. You need to eat properly. And for this, even ideas are connected with this. You see, don't use any idea you haven't thought of unless it's been outside. We have an example from himself where, for example, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the idea of Zarathustra, he got the whole idea and also the concept of the man Zarathustra. He got that idea while he was walking in those bays there in Santa Margherita all the way to Portofino. So you see, later in Ecce Homo, he explains this. So he's not just saying this, that you should get your ideas while you're outside. He's doing that. He's speaking from experience, but he also, he doesn't just preach. He does the things. He doesn't just talk about it. He does. He acts upon his principles. He acts upon his ideas and philosophy. So you see, his activity there is connected with his philosophy. His ideas is connected with philosophy and activity and diet and nutrition and everything. So you see, that is the whole idea of my stuff as well. That is the whole idea of my philosophy as well. It is, it has its theoretical parts, but it's also, behind everything. But also we have the practical, we have the guiding philosophy, the life philosophy. That is the whole point. That is exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create a philosophy that can guide people towards greater health. And he's also talking about the greater health when he's speaking of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. But he's speaking, of course, from artistry and philosophy. But in my opinion, all people should, strive for, well, I know that all people won't strive for this, but at least I can have my, golden grains, golden seeds out there. Perhaps someone will, take this to heart and use it and, become greater health. So yeah, those were Nietzsche's thoughts on vegetarianism, digestion, nutrition, diet, even activity, exercise. and these are my thoughts as well. And some thoughts are similar, some things I'm more against, for example, with the tea and coffee, but I'm also speaking from experience here with the tea. I also got headaches and all that stuff. But today we know even more, back in his day, but still, even though we have more information, we have more facts, and yet still people are still drinking these coffees and teas that are ever stronger, that are always, that are even most likely more stronger than back then. So there is no doubt about it, especially, alcohol as well and so forth. You see, he understood that, activity requires, muscle and body. And so you need meat because that is muscle and, you need it for your body. But also, vegetarianism doesn't work. Like I said, oxalates, all that stuff. He understood, he saw vegetarians and he saw himself, getting weaker from vegetarianism. It doesn't work. You don't have as much nutrition there, digestion. The body is made to eat meat and fruits, of course, but not just fruits. You can't just survive on fruits. The meat is important. So that's primary. The meat is primary, the protein is primary, and then we have the secondary, which is the fruits. So you see, it's all connected yet again. You have the meat, muscle strength, walking. He was walking, but I'm doing calisthenics, but also walking, of course. And then you have for hydration, fruits, and for so forth. But also energy and so forth. But you see, he almost instinctively understood that plants, if you eat plant-based, it has anti-nutrients, it takes away from your nutrition in your body actually, and this is happening in reality, and it takes it out, and so that's why you become weaker and weaker. That's why a lot of vegans look so weak. Not all of them, of course, and today we have all these pills and supplements, but that goes against my philosophy because supplements, you rely on externals. You see, you rely on externals. But in my philosophy, we don't rely on anything. And you can argue that food is externals. Yes, but we fast most of the day. So we only eat it in a fast burst, but a lot of it, of course, a hearty meal, but very fast in a time frame of 1 hour, maximum 2 hours. So that is the way, you see. So you see, my philosophy there of counterbalance works as well. You see, we fast a lot, that is an extremity, and then we eat a lot, but in a shorter time of period. So it's basically 80-20 rule, but it's not actually 80-20, it's more like 99 and 1%. But very extreme 1% and very extreme 99%. Or that is time. The time factor is 99 or 1%. So for example, you fast 23 hours, you eat 1 hour. You eat a lot, and when you fast, you eat nothing. And you drink nothing either, because you're dry fasting. Dry fasting will, your skin will be better, everything will be better, you're healing better because of autophagy effect. It will be, much more effective. So we implement all of these things, but you see, we can take some help from Nietzsche as well. He understood this instinctually, he understood this. Of course, he had great literature to stand on, but he understood this from experience, and, he understood that vegetarianism doesn't work. I've seen it on, my mother, it doesn't work. It didn't work for my aunt. She went back to eating meat. It simply doesn't work. And my mother eats eggs, so it's not 100% veganism. She's actually pescatarian, so she eats fish sometimes. But I always tell her, you need to eat more fish and eggs. You can actually survive totally as a pescatarian. You can actually do that because you get all the B6, all the B vitamins you need from fish. You get all the omega-3 you need from fish, you get all the fat you need from fish, but you can also, if you eat eggs, you get all of that from eggs as well. So if you're a pescatarian and you eat, some stuff from animals, like perhaps even raw milk or eggs. So those are my thoughts today. I will see you tomorrow.